we've always known that there are some kids who have genuine and deep-seated issues, and we're inclined, I think, to be very sympathetic. What I think has been breathtaking, though, for a lot of people is the explosion in the numbers of children who are presenting uh, with doubt about their own being born in the wrong body, so to speak. And in particular, the work that suggests, I have to be frank about this, I guess I'm asking you whether it's true, that a lot of this has to be seen surely as a social contagion, because if you take the United States, for example, overwhelmingly the kids who are presenting are from quite narrow backgrounds. They're from middle and high income white families, which again points clearly to a social contagion. So the explosion in the numbers, what does it tell us? Because I think that's a stunning part of all of this for us.
Yeah, I mean, I'd start with that, there have always been kids with deep-seated issues thing. That's kind of true and kind of not true at the same time. It is always true that distress is always with us, mental distress is always with us, but the form that it takes very much depends on the culture that you're in, the stories that culture tells to itself about what distress means. There are ailments, historical ailments like hysteria or vicarious menstruation, that we just don't see anymore because they're not stories we tell to each other anymore. And PTSD is a relatively recent sort of almost invention. The distress was experienced differently at different times. We don't talk about, what was it they called it after the First World War, the shock, I've forgotten the word for it. Shell
Sure.
shock, exactly. We don't talk about shell shock at all anymore. So shell shock was how the soldiers coming back from the First World War expressed their distress. Every now and then it's true, a child or an adult might sort of settle on the idea that they were in the wrong body or they were meant to be the opposite sex as their way of expressing their distress. But it's very rare that these ideas pop up unseeded by a culture. So something happened over the last century or so, really gaining pace in the last decade, that large numbers of people both felt a distress that could be interpreted as being born in the wrong body and decided that that's how they would interpret that distress. So it didn't really happen very often 50 years ago. It almost never happened in children. And when it did, it was almost exclusively very effeminate little boys. I mean, some boys are born very, I hate the word effeminate, but we all know what I mean. And those boys are much, much more likely than other boys to grow up gay. And every homophobe knows that. Every dad who wants to toughen up his son because he doesn't want a gay son knows that. And those boys, those sweet little boys who are just doing what comes naturally to them, are very prone to getting bullied, shamed, told that they must act differently. And that can create this gender distress because at some point that boy thinks to himself, everything would be much easier if I was a girl. I was meant to be a girl. I must be a girl stuck in a boy's body. So that was the only cases among children that clinicians really ever saw. And they certainly never thought of doing anything physical for that boy or telling him that he really was a girl. And then that changed over the last 20 years, really since, in the 1990s, some Dutch clinicians started thinking about treating those boys as if they were really girls. And I'm sure we'll get to the story of puberty blockers in a bit. And it got picked up in America just short of 20 years ago. And then it started to be given without any safeguards to quite a large number of people. And then in the 2010s, teenage girls started to turn up at the clinic. And they just hadn't been seen by gender clinicians before. There literally wasn't a single academic paper on gender distress in teenage girls before about 2010. Not one.
Not one.
So the clinics are now seeing these girls and they're giving them a treatment pathway that was created for effeminate little boys, who, by the way, should never have been treated anyway in that way. But it was just being given to them. So something happened in the culture is the short answer to why we're seeing it now. And we can maybe unpick bits of that, like what's happening in schools, online, with pornography and so on. But yeah, there's a lot of elements to it.